Labels are great for packaging products, but when it comes to people, they can often be a pretty limited device for understanding a person. And that's definitely the case when it comes to my guest this week, Sara Johnson. Sara's career has encompassed so many areas of the TV drama world, working as a script editor, head of drama at broadcasters like Sky and Fox, but also shepherding great work like the A Word at indies like Keshet. And Sara is now dedicated to challenging perceptions about another label, that of disability, as an advocate for the TV business to recognise and benefit from the value of deaf, disabled and neurodivergent talent. We covered a lot of ground, and I hope that the insights that Sara shares in the interview will inspire anyone listening to join with her to produce change. So enjoy, but also contact Sara to help her make a difference. Hi Sara, welcome to the pod.
You. Very nice to be here.
I always like to start with a fun question just to get the creative juices flowing. And for you, my question is this. A UK broadcaster tells you they're about to launch a new soap opera and they want you to produce it. They've given you an unlimited budget, and so you can pick any writer in the history of TV to write on the show and oversee it. Which writer would you choose?
I had super fun thinking about this. I've gone for, possibly in the time of my life that I'm in, I would like a combination of Nora Ephron, who maybe didn't do TV, but she's utterly brilliant. A writer I'm working with now called Jamie Hale. And then the two writers that wrote my own podcast, our Lucy's podcast, Sam Newton and Rachel Zisser, because I think the combination of all four of them would give the most diverse and interesting and funny and scary and brilliant soap opera that a channel needs now.
Okie dokie. Well, they sound like really good choices. And I think soaps and Eastenders were sort of your way into, or your starting point in the business. So were you a big fan of TV growing up? And how did you get into the TV business?
I was born in Manchester, and my mum had worked in radio and then in TV as a secretary. So it had always been something I was excited about. And I suppose at the point that I started at university to go, what do I want to do? I knew what I didn't want to do, and I loved reading and I love stories, and I'm a creative person. So I thought, well, that might be a fun thing to get into. In terms of EastEnders was the soap that we watched. Interestingly, as a Manchester family, we didn't watch Corrie or Emmerdale or anything else, because I think we were trying to elevate ourselves from being northern, which I've descended myself ever since from then. The way I got in was to go in as a secretary and to start to temp. But my initial way in was that my brother was a lawyer for a production company, and they said they were looking for a receptionist, and it was only a 3-month gig. And I moved from Manchester to London and took a 3-month receptionist job at Michael Hill Television. And so came in that way and managed. They were doing the British Comedy Awards and Schofield's Quest and other shows, and came in that way, and then started to temp because I'd done a secretarial course under great duress at home on my year off, and started to temp and find my way in and say to the temping companies, I only want to work in TV companies. Got into covering sick leave from somebody in TV Centre and in Centre House in the drama department, walked around giving my CV to anybody I could, and ended up in the office for Casualty, which is where I then got connected to Corinne Hollingworth and went with her when she went to EastEnders.
Okay, so you were there very early on in the Dirty Den and Ange era.
Exactly. Actually, Arthur, when I was there as at that bit, Arthur had been to prison. I've still got the bag that a fan made in America called Free the Walford One. I've still got that tote bag. It's brilliant.
And script editing was an area that you then gravitated towards.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it just made sense for and still makes sense actually, no matter what I am, I'm a script editor at heart. It made sense for my skill base and my passion and my stories and storytelling and reading and loving TV drama. And it was a way in where you could script read and be useful to somebody and then just like a sponge take it all in. And working for Corinne was amazing because she would write her notes on a script and I would type them up and send them to whoever they were. So I was on the job just learning the whole thing. And then I followed her to Channel 5 and went with her as her PA at Channel 5, which is where I met Jeffrey Ford and everybody else and other people I'm sure you've interviewed, and was the PA to her as the controller of drama, again, just learning as I did the job.
And are soaps the equivalent of an army boot camp that can prepare its recruits for really any kind of storytelling?
I think they are, and I think they still are, and they certainly were then. They are the most amazing training ground. Back then, I think you kind of would sink or swim because the pressure is massive. You have got to get that show on air in that slot year round. I'm so old that when I was there, Eastenders wasn't even 3 times a week. 3 times a week was when we did double banks and we're doing that extra episode. And it was the most extraordinary training. You couldn't do anything other than learn how to do that, and to reach millions and millions of viewers was a kind of unbelievable privilege in a time that is not really the same anymore.
You then ended up in more corporate environments, and I think that's a theme that we're going to develop a little bit, which is switching from more specifically creative environments to more kind of executive and corporate environments. One of those was Sony Pictures, where we first came across each other. Seems like a long time ago.
It really does.
And so a kind of relatively brief sojourn at Sony, and then Sky. Mm-hmm. So if we jump to Sky, talk about what Sky One and its drama output and comedy, but specifically its drama output, looked like at that point, and then we can maybe think about what it looks like now.
Yeah, it was such an extraordinary time. I was at Sony for such a short time because I had been talking for quite a while to Mark Freeland, who at the time was the head of drama and comedy at Sky, and sort of talking about working with him, but there wasn't a job. And then there was a job when I'd only been at Sony for a few months because I'd script edited on a Sony co-production, which is how I got into Sony. And I went to Sky, and within 6 weeks of joining, Mark announced he was going to be the head of comedy at the BBC. So I went into a department where it was just the two of us, and then was left, age 28, in charge of the output for Sky Drama. It was Dream Team, and they had commissioned Mile High from Hewland Television. And there was also a show called Is Harry on the Boat, where I basically spent quite a long time having to explain to people, once I'd found out myself, what Is Harry on the Boat means, which is a lovely sexual thing that I'm glad I don't have to explain anymore. We had Ibiza Uncovered on Screen and Factual, and the whole commissioning team was very young, actually. So I was indicative of that team in our late 20s and just shocking ourselves at this job and going, oh my God. At the time that I joined, I had to fight quite hard to not have the job taken away from me, because I was literally left with 46 hours of television on my own, having to learn to manage upwards, sideways, downwards. When I went in, Liz Murdoch had just left and started Shine, and had that output deal with Shine, which ended up being the first drama that was commissioned that was not that long-running format. And we commissioned Hex, that was kind of the British Buffy. So it was always looking at what Sky did and finding the originals, but trying to move the tanker, ridiculous, analogy, is to stop making shows about strippers and holiday reps, was basically what I went to people saying. We need to do more. Let me do this. I want to watch things like Buffy and Angel. What's our version of that? Put Dream Team on a rolling thing, got Mile High out there, which was before Footballers' Wives, and did it there, but it did it on Sky where, there wasn't very much money, and it kind of chewed people up and spat them out who were working on it, including me trying to oversee it. But it was a really, really exciting time. And in the time that I was there, I had 3 different heads of channel. So in the time that I was there, Dawn Airy came in. So I'd had one, and then Dawn brought in Sarah Ramsden, had Kate Marsh, then Sarah Ramsden. Then Sarah went quite quickly, and James Baker came back in to steady the ship because James had been there before. And each one jumped my development slate each time, my whole development slate. And I was like, but just please, I've done Hex. Let's just keep doing. We had the most amazing drama about Dunblane. We had such fantastic things. But I think I wanted to move us more quickly than it was quite ready to do. I really, really was the very early days of quality, higher budget drama at Sky.
And of course, it's evolved very much in that direction.
Indeed. So I won't take full credit for it, but I will say I was definitely now old enough to have been there at the beginning.
The mid-2000s were a period where you juggled your personal and professional life. There were milestones professionally, including developing material with Linda LaPlante, and also the joy of motherhood and the complexities of parenting a child with disability.
Mm-hmm.
How did you juggle these competing areas of your life?
I talk about this quite a lot because I think the parent carer piece of my career and life was something that nowadays would have been much easier than it was then. So when I left Sky, and I had my first child when I was at Sky when I was 32, and then my second child when I was at 34. I'd left by then. I was working at NBC, and actually before I went to Linda LaPlante, I had to take 18 months off because my son was exceptionally ill within weeks of being born. But I'd had a very difficult pregnancy that I just kind of fought my way through, and will go to hospital and then go to the office. And he was very poorly, and at 9 months was diagnosed with 2 very rare genetic conditions that nobody had ever heard of, and that nobody could tell me what the matter was. But I had a very sick kid that somebody had said to me, all I could find out was that he might not walk or talk. So this was, your whole life turns on a penny. And how can I do that job? And especially at that high level, as a woman trying to make my way through, as a mum anyway, I couldn't go back to work for 18 months until I could get him well enough to have childcare, because he couldn't go to nursery because his immune system was bad. And honestly, I got the job for LaPlante through Corinne and James Baker and Anne Harris from Sony. I went to all 3 of them and said, I need to get back to work, and I don't know how to do it. And I need some help because this vulnerability isn't a very good look. And Corinne put me in touch, and Liz Thorburn, who was running LaPlante Productions at the time, who was still a really good friend of mine, suddenly sort of said to me, your CV is amazing. We need a head of development. And I hadn't felt like that for quite a long time. I hadn't thought I could ever go back to my career. But I hid quite the reality of my home life. I would go to work to be mostly yelled at in many situations, and not by Liz. And my kid would have been turning blue at the kitchen table, and I'd have to leave that behind and make sure that I was training my au pairs and knowing when to call me, let me hear him on the phone, where I'd have to go to hospital or whatever. It was very hard, and I realized I can't do anything but this because I live in London, and I've got to earn money, and my husband had his own business, and so I kept it very separate. Sara Johnson TV, Sara Jackson Home did not really meet in the office. They met at home. I mostly didn't have time or energy to network. So lots of people who didn't know me because other than the actual needs of my day job and doing it well and not giving a bad name should they ever work out how complicated my home life was to anyone else in that position. I felt very responsible in that sense. In the same, when I went part-time, I needed to be the hardest working part-time person in the world to just make sure that people didn't devalue working mums or carers. It was very hard. And the first time that the two me's came together was in my interview for Keshet, for the job at Keshet, which was the first senior job where I saw the trailer for the A Word and sitting in Soho House being interviewed and burst out crying and went, I know that, Mum. I know this story. I can sell this. I'll take this job, whatever it is. And it was the time that we came together. But I continued to mask the struggle, actually. And my boy is an amazing, miraculous 16-year-old doing his GCSEs now. But I don't think I came off red alert until he was honestly 7. And then I don't really think I thought, okay, I can do this job, my career now, until he got to secondary school. And that was it was a burden to constantly hide something in yourself that people might not understand, that I think nowadays would have been understood and is understood a lot more.
And how does that change you professionally? So it obviously changes you a lot personally, but from a professional point of view, how does that change you, particularly as you're working in a creative environment? And so if you're making creative decisions that are based on instincts and informed by your experience, then it must have some impact on the way that you see the work, for example, particularly if it's something like the A Word.
Yeah, I think everything. I often used to say my DNA changed at the point that my kid's DNA was revealed. I don't know if it changed me creatively, because my pride at the A Word and taking it to Patrick, and who did, their company did such a beautiful job with it, and Pete Bowker, and the legacy with Ralph and Katie and all of that. It's the proudest thing I had ever done. And I can say that now. I don't think it changed me creatively, but what it did in work terms, it was the beginning of me mentoring people and making it my business to find people with disabilities, or to see what the business was like for everyone else, because I was starting to think, how will my son work? Would he be able to work in this industry? Who will he be? What will he do? Because he was always very interested, and still is really interested in what I do, who I'm meeting, where I'm going. So behaviorally, it changed me, because I felt like TV betrayed me a little bit, in that I was suddenly seen as something else. And I wrote an article in Broadcast October 21 that talked about this, being a parent carer, and there were people coming through to me with the most beautiful messages saying, that's so vulnerable, I had no idea, I'm so sorry, I hope you know. And I kind of think, yeah, it judged me, and actually nobody really knew how hard it was for me to try to still be the same person. So I think the changes in my work life were behavioral more than creative, both in terms of what I wanted to do for other people and what I started to feel about myself. And I have a homing instinct for other people who have something that they don't want to reveal that might make them look less good at their jobs. And I think that's what was there. I cared a bit less about what everyone cared about, and I started to care about how I was treated, how I behaved, and what I would put up with in terms of other people being treated in a certain way. I've never thought about it in that way before, Danny Goldman. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that's hopefully one of the many benefits of being a guest on Here Comes Pod. Were there extra hurdles, do you think, to overcome in bringing that series to the screen?
Actually, no. It had an interesting little journey of developed and then ended up elsewhere. And taking it to Patrick and in the hands of Pete Bowker and his absolutely beautiful work on it. And I think the power of the original series. Karen Margalit wrote this series. I think it's one of the most perfect things I've ever seen. And she is the mother of a child with autism, and it had made massive seismic progress for people with autism and neurodivergent people in Israel when it was aired. And Patrick's experience and Pete's work and Jenny, who produced it, I think actually it was just great drama made beautifully. And Lucy Richer at the BBC was an amazing champion for the storytelling, and of course Pete. And it was just, I think it was very special. I don't think it ended up being harder than anything else, and it ended up where it should be, mainstream television showing families who live with difference on BBC. You know, it was extraordinary.
You returned to the commissioning side of the fence with Fox in 2016. So there is this, again, theme of switching sides. And there were two standout shows on your credit list with Deep State and War of the Worlds. And then after the Disney acquisition of Fox, it was then back to the producer side as creative director at Endor Productions. How have you been able to straddle both sides of this dynamic between being a buyer and a seller and a commissioner and a maker?
I don't know, actually. I think I ended up going where it felt like I could bring most value, but I had a number of ridiculous jobs where I was the first person in. So at Sky, I was kind of the first person into it only being drama. At NBC, actually, then they were at the beginning of co-productions. Actually, they were enhanced acquisitions, and Rockface was going to, not Rockface, Ice Planet, can't remember what it was called, was going to be their first co-production, not enhanced acquisition. And when I went to Keshet, I was the first person in, because this was them doing a production company, because you couldn't do it in the same agent model then as they'd done it with Hatterfin to Homeland in the US. And then Fox, Jeff was mightily doing what he could do, but ultimately didn't have a commissioning person there who knew about drama. And suddenly it was, I think we're going to make original commissions. And I am that person who rolled her sleeves up and went, fine, and okay, I've got to do it on my own then, thanks so much. You know, and I just became that person. I don't know, really. I love people, and I like to think I'm quite well behaved and nice to be around. And so I tended to just instinctively go, I think I can do that. I think I can do that. I'll just plink. And no one seemed to question it, because the skill base, I think, is the same. Managing upwards, I learned at an early age, and sideways and everything at Sky. And then the skill base is treat creatives and everyone around you really well and allow them to do their best work, which you can do as a commissioner of a tiny slate, much more than you can do as a commissioner of a big slate. So I've never done that commissioning job where everyone knows what the job is. I've done the commissioning job where no one really knew what the job was, and that became my thing.
So talking about what you're doing now, in October 21, you founded Bridge 06. What does the company do, and how does it draw on yours and your partner's many years of experience to produce meaningful change in the way that TV and film and the wider entertainment business approaches the area of disability, as well as advocating for wider change? So
Bridge 06 came out of an end to my job at Endor. My job at Endor was entirely the entire way through the pandemic. So it had meant to be something that in the end, it just didn't really turn out to be. And I had a growing understanding of the people I was mentoring and disability-led groups that I was reaching out to, and trying to be as helpful as I could, and trying to work with disabled talent and pitch disabled talent, because it felt like there was a movement towards it. Even between then and now, actually, I used to count how many minutes it took on a diversity webinar or something for anyone to mention disability, because it's different, and I couldn't see. I never have to do that anymore, not since Jack Thorne's McTaggart in 21. So I have been thinking for years that I should be doing something else, that I see it all very clearly, and there's not enough allies who have got the kind of career I have, where I have been on all sides of the business. I can code switch between international sales and talent and commissioning and program finance teams and lawyers and this and that and the other, because I've had this weird career that suddenly maybe makes sense to stand entirely alongside these disabled-led groups who have been banging their heads against these barriers, let alone glass ceilings. They haven't even got to the glass ceilings for the trickle down to happen. And I couldn't see anybody who wasn't in a job at a broadcaster caring about it. I had started pitching things, and then the job end happened, and I just thought, I'm going to make what I call a terrifying pivot and stop being part of the problem and attempt to see what my part of the solution could be. So the partner you refer to is Julie Fernandez, the amazing, glorious Julie, who is the best thing to have happened to me last year, because I've had quite a hard personal year, and she is literally the best thing that has happened to me. And we found each other through me being in the right place at the right time, trying to say, what can I do? I don't think there's enough people like me here listening to you and trying to see where we can be helpful in allyship. So Bridge 06 was founded in allyship, literally threw up a website overnight. The name is, I was a bridge between speaking to power and listening to the same talent who had the same problems, and the people I was mentoring can't get an agent. That an agent won't read your script, want to be a script editor. There's no anything's my access requirements. I don't want to tell somebody, but if you're visually disabled, you can't help but tell somebody. And the pandemic was amazing because somebody in a wheelchair was just sitting in a chair. But what was going to happen after that? Julie and I were brought together so that she was the co-lead in order for me as a non-disabled person to lead screen skills funded training for access coordinators. We came together and we have been literally joined at the hip since, because she now works as a full-time access coordinator. Bridge 06 does many, many things. I literally point and shoot at anything that feels like it could be done that I could do in terms of increasing disability representation, working with broadcasters, international studios, production companies, and everything alongside Julie, who is a full partner in the business. She works full-time as an access coordinator. I am her agent. We are also representing and helping to put into the business the access coordinators we trained. We are the kind of outliers doing stuff informally without permission, mostly to just get on with this, while brilliant work is being done by the TV Access Project. And they are really, it's a pan broadcaster initiative with 11 broadcast partners, where finally the industry is saying, you're right, and we need to do something, and there needs to be action behind our intent. Julie and I did the first course of access coordinators. We're now trying to represent them, trying to formalize the rollout of the position, done a rate card, not given permission, but I just thought I need to be transparent how I'm negotiating with people, come up with a process on the way that Julie does the job. We are part of the jigsaw of brilliant disabled-led groups and disabled, deaf, disabled, neurodivergent people who've been working and doing this for a very long time. We aim to stand alongside trying to do whatever we can do. It's the most terrifying thing I've done. I have walked away from a high-paying, consistent job as a TV drama exec into something that ultimately is unknown on a daily basis, that I do on my own, but with Julie. I haven't ever left the house since the pandemic, because here I am. I don't have an office, but it is purpose and passion fueled. And I think this is the time where, if we don't do this properly and we don't listen and we don't invest in the careers of deaf, disabled, neurodivergent people, get them to the top so that they're making those decisions, we'll never be forgiven. And we will have lost this extraordinary workforce who leave it in droves because the very simple thing of their access requirements being met is not happening. And I can't wait to then keep just talking about all the parent carers that nobody looks after, that I want the industry to be better about as well.
So an incredibly rich and diverse set of experiences. Having been through all of those different experiences, what would you say, what advice would you give to your younger self, or indeed the next generation of executives coming through, about how to be successful in the world of TV?
I've got a phrase I love using, which is to face outwards to the world as you face inwards to yourself as you go there. I think this industry has started the work it needs to do for all pillars of diversity and all codes of behavior. And I think everybody coming into this business should be signing up to the fact that there should be no excuses about how we treat people or about working practices, and certainly about the thing that I'm passionate about, which, to explain, I care so deeply about DDN individuals and how they're treated, because I don't want my son to come into this business until somebody understands how brilliant he is, whilst accepting and accommodating his access requirements. So I believe everybody has a personal responsibility to come into the business, firstly thinking, why not me? Wouldn't it be great? Understanding that if they get into this business, make it better, help everyone to make it better, speak careful truth to power. If you can't do it yourself, find those organizations that can help you do it. TV has become a really, really hard place for people. And I think in terms of people with caring responsibilities and women coming back after having kids, generally, there's a lot of work being done, but we've lost a lot of brilliant people. So I think everyone coming in should bring this generation's care to every day in the job that they do.
And would you say TV is a better place to be working in now than when you started, in terms of these elements that you refer to? And better is obviously a very subjective word, but just as a cipher for some kind of improvement, is that the case, or do you think its progress has been ridiculously slow?
I think on a personal level, things that I put up with as a young woman in the industry, as a rule, are not acceptable anymore. And I'm pretty delighted about that. And I try really hard not to be that old woman of the hills saying, oh, just pull your socks up, dear. I don't. I have a niece who works in TV, and across time have just said, tell me what it's like for you, and I'll tell you things I put up with, and possibly will go, wow, I'm really glad you don't have to anymore. What would you be, what are you thinking now about that? I do think that we've got a way to go. I think there's a lot of woke snowflake accusations that come at people. Very specifically, I think a lot of our industry are neurodivergent, and everyone needs to have a much better attitude towards that, not least as of things that are in the news at the moment. I would hope that it's better, but I think that the work is still being done. I think that maybe some people for whom it is difficult to change their ways will be exiting the industry. And I really hope people who are coming in would question, some of that behavior that was not enjoyable. The shouting, the bullying, the put up with it, the inappropriateness. I really hope and think that we are much better at that and on our way to solving it. We're not there by any means. I'm an eternal optimist, and I do think there's way more people out there caring. There are some amazing companies out there genuinely caring deeply about their staff, and that makes me very happy. And then I don't have to look at the rest of it that maybe is still a bit shit.
So finally, if you were offered the chance, I'm going to bring it back to telly now. If you were offered the chance to schedule an evening of programming that represents excellence in the representation of characters and storylines that relate to disability, which 3 pieces of content, so try and make it quite broad there, it could be TV, film, whatever, would you choose from any genre to have out there?
I would like there to be a series of high budget and well supported shorts as a series. It's not play for today and blah 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 blah, but some of the stuff that soaps do, which is a training ground for talent who are deaf, disabled, neurodivergent, and supremely talented, to be supported to making high budget series of shorts that people go to as a strand that never stops. So that's number 1. And 2 people I'd like in that is Adam Morse, a sight impaired film director who I'm working with, who's got a foundation and is trying to change the world, and a wonderful American woman who is a Black deaf writer director called Natasha Afili. I would like both of them to be bringing their experience of two things to, deafness and sight loss into how to make beautiful television, because I've seen both beautiful films. So short films, get it done, get it funded, because most people don't have that money. And I think that we need to use it as a training ground for people to get credits, because once they get credits, they can then get an agent and they can have a sustainable career. So that's one. I think there has to be a reality show that is completely badass and funny and outrageous and not worthy, where any number of wonderful writers who are DDN would come in and get to be outrageous in factual. I don't know what that is. I don't think it exists yet. I'm brought back to how I felt when I saw Castaways, which was Jack Thorne's, way back when. I'm brought to mind to that, and then Barbara Met Allen, that kind of raucous, I'm going to swear, fuck you attitude to that, but in a reality sense. I don't know what it is. I think there's so many brilliant creatives who could do that. I think there has to be a factual something. And then I think there need to be more brilliant, beautiful films like Crip Camp, which, if you haven't seen, you need to go and hunt down. It's amazing. It's the legacy of Judy Heumann, the American disability advocate who recently died. I just think there are some amazing filmmakers out there, and single dramas don't exist anymore, and it's quite hard to get theatrical releases for films. And I think you've got a generations of filmmakers who can't get their things made, and what can TV do for that?
Very good. Well, Sara Johnson, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I wish you all the most amazing success with Bridge 06, and I hope it can produce the kind of change that you've been advocating for. In a way, you brought us the A team through the A word, but it does feel that the time is now right for the S team to come into TV.
Thank you, Danny. It's such a total pleasure to talk about and look at everything, with hindsight. So thank you.
My pleasure.